Good morning, everybody. Now, the woke mainstream media is calling for a pandemic amnesty. There's an article in the Atlantic magazine earlier this week, and the title of the article, I'll just read it here, was "Let's Declare a Pandemic Amnesty." And the underwriting for that was, "We need to forgive one another for what we did and said when we were in the dark about COVID." Well, you can stick that where the sun doesn't shine. There should be no pandemic amnesty at all. The interesting thing about this is that the people who are pushing this, smearing people, cancelling people, slandering people for not going along with the narratives of the last 2.5 years are actually now admitting that they were wrong and we were right. Okay, that's something. But they're now calling for them to be forgiven. Oh, we didn't know what we were doing when we tried to get you cancelled, when we tried to get you arrested, when we tried to get you kicked off platforms, and even get your finances destroyed and thrown out of your jobs and so on. There's no forgiveness and no amnesty for them. What they need is a Nuremberg Trial. It's about like saying, oh, the National Socialists after the end of the Second World War, oh, well, we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't really know how bad National Socialism was. Please forgive us for all the nasty things we did over the last 6 years. Do you think that would have happened in the 1940s? I don't think so. And that shouldn't happen now as well. Look, I'm not raging with hatred for all of these people. It's not good to carry hatred and bitterness around in your soul. Of course not. But we mustn't forget what these people have done. Now, I'm obviously in the UK. Some of you watching this might be in other countries, the USA, Canada, Australia, and other places. So I can talk about the sort of people who said things in the UK, and that goes for people in the government, in the media, and also in the health services who actually carried out these things, and the police and security services as well, who enforced tyranny. All of those people in all of those different areas need to be held accountable for what they did. We can't just forget and say, oh, that was okay. They all breached our fundamental freedoms and human rights again and again and again, and tried to ruin the fabric of our society and destroy people by the millions, destroy businesses, destroy children's education, destroy people's mental health, and destroy lives and livelihoods. One of the worst people, I think, was the health secretary at the time, Matt Hancock. Under his watch, many elderly people who were diagnosed with COVID were sent to care homes and put on the so-called Liverpool care pathway, end-of-life care pathway, where they were given do not resuscitate orders. Some of them signed them without really knowing what they were signing because they weren't in any fit state to sign it, or just allocated places on that so-called care pathway and dosed up with morphine and midazolam, denied food and water until they died in the United Kingdom in the 2020s. And many healthcare professionals were complicit in doing that because they were the ones who actually carried out those murders in care homes. Should we forgive and forget? I don't think so. They need to be brought to justice. Then there was Sajid Javid. And on his watch, as health secretary, care home workers were threatened with being fired from their jobs if they didn't take an experimental injection. 40,000 care home workers lost their jobs and are still out of work At the very least, they deserve compensation and reinstatement. But should we forgive him? And the managers of the care homes who fired their very, very good and dedicated care home staff who have now had their lives and livelihoods destroyed? No, we shouldn't. They deserve to be brought to accountability and justice. And on Sajid Javid's watch as well, he went further and tried to fire 100,000 NHS nurses and doctors for choosing not to take an experimental injection. The sensible, critical thinking doctors and nurses who realised that this injection was not as safe and effective as everybody was telling them it was. Should the NHS bosses who wanted to fire the nurses and doctors be forgiven? No. They should be held accountable for what they did. And then there was the media people. Piers Morgan, for example, calling everybody a COVIDiot and propagating the narrative from the very, very beginning and smearing and slandering people who were not totally in favour of locking the country down and closing everything and keeping everybody away from each other and apart from each other. And Andrew Neil, who wrote, I think, one of the most disgusting headlines I've ever seen in my life in the Daily Mail. We need to punish Britain's 5 million vaccine refuseniks. Should they be forgiven? They should be held accountable for what they said and what they sowed in our society. And then there's the police who enforce the tyrannical rules, fining people, harassing people for walking in a park, for sitting on a park bench, talking to friends, having people round for a coffee morning, closing down a church in South London on Good Friday and threatening the churchgoers with fines and arrests for worshipping Jesus on Good Friday in London, the capital of the United Kingdom, in the 2020s. Should they be forgiven? No. They should be held accountable for what they did. Because you know, all these people who are now saying that, oh, please forgive us for what we did. We didn't know what we were doing. You should know from history that just following orders, just doing my job, and imposing tyranny is not an excuse for imposing tyranny and undermining people's freedoms and destroying your own nation from within. And those people would all do it again in a heartbeat if another situation came up. They need to know that what they did was wrong, and they will be the first to try to cancel somebody for simply saying there are two sexes, for example, male and female, if you don't go along with other of the woke nonsense that they're trying to perpetrate and push on society. They're still trying to cancel and destroy people for other things, although they're now saying a big mea culpa about lockdowns and perhaps injections as well. Although I don't think that's the case with most of them. So no, I forgive personally, but we must never forget, and we must still make sure these people are held accountable and brought to justice for what they did, and make sure this never, ever happens again.